Reddit lawyers. What's the dumbest thing your client has done to screw up a case? Story 1. I'm not a lawyer, but I used to review disability claims, so I worked closely with folks who did have lawyers. One guy calls me furious. His lawyer had told him not to talk to us directly, solid, standard advice, but here he was, ignoring it completely. He launched into a full-blown tirade about how his lawyer didn't know what he was talking about. According to him, he could grocery shop, mow the lawn, do housework no problem. Totally fine. Nothing to see here. But I'd read his medical records. There was no way he was doing all that without a struggle. So I started digging. Yes, he could shop for groceries if he rode a mobility scooter and had his wife haul everything inside. Yes, he could mow the lawn with a riding mower and only if he stopped every 10 minutes to rest. Yes, he could do housework as long as it meant wiping down counters and folding laundry that someone else carried for him. I called his attorney right after we hung up right after he yelled at the clouds one last time. I approved the claim, but man, that guy has no idea how close he came to torpedoing himself. All because I had an extra 15 minutes and a little curiosity. Story 2. We'd spent months building the case preparatory hearings, statements, restraining orders, the whole works. It was a textbook domestic violence case, or so it seemed. Then, on the very morning of the trial, my client casually drops the bomb. She'd just returned from a sun-soaked 2-week holiday with the defendant. Jet skis, cocktails, matching tants the works. Minutes later, opposing counsel strolls over, grinning, and waves a folder thick with photos and messages proof of the vacation bliss. Now, none of this erased what may have happened before. But, with no physical evidence and only testimonials, the optics alone gutted our case. I had to break it down for her. Legally, the past still matters. But a judge isn't going to ignore the fact that she'd just been partying with the man she'd asked to be protected from. We settled. Trial never saw daylight. Story 3. Client gets popped for DUI. Small town, one bar. The kind of place where everybody knows your name and also your drinking habits. He and his wife had a routine. Hit the bar, catch a buzz, then stroll a quarter-mile back to their houseboat. No drama. Local tradition. That night, another regular at the bar gets absolutely tanked. The owner wants her out, but doesn't want her driving. Client and wife, trying to be the good Samaritans of Boozeville, offer to walk her to her car so she can crash in the back seat while waiting for a ride. Client helps her into the SUV's back seat. He's drunk, but he's not driving. Drops his keys on the way around to the front. Opens the unlocked door, flips on the interior lights to make sure she's good. Cops are parked across the street, hunting for drunk drivers. They see the light flick on and decide that's enough to declare a vehicular felony. Boom, client's in cuffs before the lights finish buzzing on. He's got a prior DUI from a dozen years back. Judge says it stays out unless he opens the door. I drill him hard in prep. Don't talk about your past. Don't claim you'd never do something dumb like drive drunk. Just explain what happened. That's it. Clean and simple. Trial day. Direct is smooth. I line him up for a perfect final question is chance to humanize himself. Explain how frustrating it was to get arrested while trying to do the right thing. He looks at the jury and says, I would never do something like that. I could hear the hinges creak on the courtroom door flying open. Judge greenlights the prior DUI. DA slides it right in on rebuttal. Jury doesn't need dessert, they're done in 25 minutes. Story 4. Back when I was a 3L working in my school's family law clinic, we got stuck in one of those never dies custody case. Dad had remarried, and the new stepmom? She made it her personal mission to erase the biological mom from the kid's life. She called him her spirit son, which should have been our first red flag. Every scraped knee or forgotten lunch was a federal case in her eyes. They kept hauling mom to court hoping to upgrade from 50-50 to full custody. But the court never moved an inch. Then, in true villain origin story fashion, stepmom decided Wetha law students were the real problem. She called the school, lobbed accusations that we'd been threatening the child, doing unspeakable things, and demanded we be expelled or else the university would be sued into dust. So we filed an emergency hearing, laid it all out for the judge, and asked for sanctions. Said this wasn't just annoying anymore, it was harassment. The judge agreed, held the couple in contempt for trying to intimidate us out of the case, even said on the record that he questioned whether they were fit to co-parent at all. Primary custody shifted to mom. The couple got alternating weekends and a slice of holidays. And the kicker? The judge banned them from filing any more custody motions, said the courtroom was no longer their weapon. Oh, and they also tried to file a bar complaint against our supervising professor. That too was investigated. That too went nowhere. Total plot twist. What started as a custody fight ended with them losing everything they were fighting for. Story 5. One of the first, and definitely one of the last divorce cases I took solo, started off like a soap opera. The husband claimed his wife had vanished to Nepal, leaving him and their 7-year-old daughter behind. No contact, no address, just whispers of a mysterious new lover. So we proceed as if she's gone. Service by publication, uncontested filingits, all going smoothly, until it's not. She shows up in court with a lawyer and receipts digital trails proving her husband knew exactly where she was the whole time. Then he emails me, casually admitting he might have stretched the truth a little. I told him we can still work something out with her lawyer, but only if he's completely honest from now on, and, oh, he'd need to pay me because this was no longer an uncontested anything. He did neither. Continued lying, more red flags, so I withdrew mandatory due to fraud on the court. We get to the motion hearing, and he objects. Tells the judge I'm only quitting over money, then pulls out a stack of printed emails our entire client communication and tries to hand it to the judge like a bomb in manila form. Wife's lawyer, bless her, gently points out that if he submits it, they get to read it too. He hesitates. The judge stares, speechless. I tell him I can't explain further without harming my very soon-to-be ex-client. It's a mandatory withdrawal. Judge signs off. My former client finally stops talking. I walk out before. Story 6. This wasn't a dumb move. The poor guy genuinely couldn't stop himself. Like Ron White said, he had the right to remain silent, just not the ability. It was an involuntary commitment hearing for a man deep in a manic psychotic episode. He'd landed in the hospital after attempting to break into his own mother's house by knocking with a .357 Magnum. You know, the gentle kind of knock. The prosecutor runs through all the diagnostics, background, mental health history, lots of detail, lots of drama, then rests his case. Forgets to ask the doctor the essential question: does this specific man meet the legal criteria for commitment? Defense attorney lights up like it's Christmas morning. He's already halfway to the podium to ask for a dismissal. He's basically won. Then his client tugs on his sleeve. Urgently. The whispering starts fierce, desperate. The attorney's expression goes from, I can't believe this, to, oh no, he's really going to do it. He turns back to the judge and, with visible pain, announces that his client insists in testifying, despite his advice not to. The judge tries to warn him off it, but it's no use. The man takes the stand and launches into a breathless, chaotic monologue. Wild connections, angry rants, scattered thought sets like watching someone try to read 15 radio stations at once. The judge finally cuts him off. And then, just before stepping down, he seals the deal with, oh, and Your Honor, make them give me my gun back. He was committed. Immediately. Some days, all you can do is nod, sigh, and update your notes. Story 7. The guy who handled my business and legal stuff? He's now a federal judge. Back in his lawyering days, though, he handled divorces and civil cases. And one particular client gave him a front row seat to a masterclass in self-destruction. So this wealthy guy files for divorce. There's a prenup and it's airtight. It lays out exactly who gets what, when, and how much alimony is owed, adjusting yearly for inflation. Very detailed. But there's one big flaming red exception: cheating. If the woman cheats, she walks away with zero alimony and just a one-time $100K payment. If the man cheats, he loses the family home, all vehicles except his daily driver, and a quarter of his company. There was a buyout clause, but that ended up being irrelevant. So court day rolls around. Lawyer, let's call him Mike, meets the client in a conference room beforehand. The guy shows up glowing, absolutely thrilled. Mike, meet Jasmine. We got engaged in France over the weekend. She's incredible. We've been dating for 2 months. Mike shook her hand, sat down slowly, and said, so, we have a problem. Client blinked. What do you mean? You're cheating, Mike said. This moment, right, here is legally considered discovery. I have to report this to the other side. But we're separated, the guy protested. Mike just pointed at the prenup. Cheating is defined as any close relationship before the divorce is finalized. And you wrote that clause, yourself. Cue full-on meltdown. The client was so furious, he skipped court entirely, didn't even show. The judge issued a default judgment, gave the wife everything she asked for, and thanks to the prenup and the cheating, ordered the full financial transfer within 30 days. The guy then tried to pull some next-level nonsense. Tried to move the business to a trust tied to his new fiancée. Tried to wire her $1.1 million in cash. But once the judge caught wind, game over. The trust trick was declared illegal, and the fiancé had to give back the money. She'd been formally notified, so the judge held her accountable too. He fought it for years. Lost more than just the case. He lost the company, the house, a fleet of luxury cars, and, eventually, Jasmine too. These days, according to his daughter, we work together, he's a bitter retiree holed up in rural New Mexico, golfing once a month when he can scrape it together, and posting online rants about how women ruined his life. No, sir, you did that all by yourself with a ring in France and a really bad memory. Story 8. I won't badmouth my own client 7, the ones who've made me question the trajectory of human evolution but opposing counsel's client. Fair game. We were suing a debt collector who froze my client's bank account without ever getting a judgment. Big no-no in New York. Like, you learned this in week 1. Kind of illegal. The collector had been in the game since before I was born, so I figured this wasn't a rookie mistake, more like a shortcut with a motive. I suspected he couldn't sue on the debt, but proving that? Long shot. I expected we'd settle, low chalk it up to negligence, slap on the wrist. Then he hands over documents on the underlying debt. One jumps out. Not because it was helpful, but because it looked weirdly polished. Like Photoshop polished. I subpoena the original creditor, just in case. And bingo, the date of default had been changed. Why? To make it look like the debt wasn't time-barred. In reality, he legally couldn't sue over it. Now, falsifying evidence is already a bad look. But what really nailed him was the cover-up. Intent is hard to prove unless you leave digital fingerprints on a forged record. And the cherry on top? His own attorney didn't catch it before handing it over in discovery. When it all came to light, the poor guy had to withdraw for accidentally suborning perjury. It was a spectacular implosion, great for me and my client. Story 9. I had just started at a new firm, fresh-faced and caffeinated, when I walked right into the middle of an ongoing false advertising case. Our client, the defendant, swore up and down that their bold marketing claims were based on a long-lost scientific report, allegedly written years ago by a now semi-retired scientist who remembered doing the tests but not, helpfully, what the results were. Trial rolls around. Plaintiff presents their case. We're limping through, holding it together with gum and procedural tape, and then at the literal close of plaintiff's evidence, our client's CFO storms into the federal courtroom like he's in a legal-themed reality show, holding up a dusty binder like it's the 10 Commandments. He'd been cleaning out a cabinet, no one asked why, and miraculously found the missing report. What followed was pure courtroom chaos. Plaintiff screams mistrial. Judge is hammering his gavel like he's trying to break the bench. Lawyers are yelling across the aisle. My boss is objecting to the air molecules. No one is listening. It was biblical. And the best part? The report backed absolutely none of the advertising claims. In fact, it basically walked across the courtroom and sat in the plaintiff's lap, confirmed every single one of their allegations. We got obliterated judgment north of $10 million. I left the firm not long after. Story 10. Got called in for jury duty, just sitting there, quietly observing the dance between attorneys and potential jurors, waiting to see if my name would get the spotlight. One of the charges on the table was aggravated assault. Serious stuff. The defense attorney was questioning a juror who happened to be a professional videographer, asking if her job might sway how much weight she gave to video evidence. To me, that was a subtle tell. Video was going to play a starring role in this trial. But before the juror could even open her mouth, the defendant sitting calmly at the defense table until that moment suddenly blurted out, "I had a mask on. You can't even see my face." Dead silence. The kind of silence where even the dust motes in the sunlight stop moving. You could feel every brain in that room going, "Did he really just say that?" The defense attorney froze for a beat, probably rebooting his entire life. Then, with remarkable poise, asked the judge to dismiss the entire jury pool. The judge didn't argue. We were all sent back to the holding room. 5 minutes later, a court clerk came in, looking half amused and half exhausted, and let us know that the trial was being rescheduled. Even the already picked jurors were off the hook. Sometimes the best confession is unintentional. Story 11. I had a front row seat to one of the most spectacular courtroom. This guy was being sentenced for statutory assault mandatory minimum time in our state. The judge was already on track to hand down the absolute lightest sentence legally allowed. There was nothing left to screw up, unless, of course, you really put your back into it. Enter the defendant. He stands up for allocution, clearly thinking he's about to drop a soul-stirring speech. His attorney, who looked like he aged 10 years during the trial, visibly deflated the moment the guy opened his mouth. At first, it was the usual routine. This is unfair. It's ruined my life. It's bad for my business, yada yada. But then, out of nowhere, he decides to clarify that this wasn't even his fault because, get this, he usually checks the ages of his hookers, but this time he didn't. He literally said that in open court, on the record, to a judge. The judge actually blinked, leaned forward, and asked him to repeat it. And he did. Word for word. His attorney just stared at the table like it might open up and swallow him. I think everyone in the room briefly forgot how to breathe. Now, the defendant was apparently a bit of a local oddball, had a reputation for weird habits and eccentric choices, so maybe this was on brand. But wow, just wow, the judge, miraculous still, gave him the minimum sentence. Maybe he felt bad. Maybe he was too stunned to do anything else. And while the prosecution could have hit him with an additional charge right there, they didn't. Possibly because they, too, were speechless. And while we're talking courtroom antics, the number of defendants who show up wearing candy-printed shirts to court for candy-related charges is truly astounding. 420 shirts? Every single week. And don't get me started on the GPS bandits, the kids who'd steal TomToms from cars and then tell sob stories about how they dreamed of going to law school, but these charges are ruining my future. It got to the point where I was going to be a lawyer, became an unofficial courthouse drinking game. Story 12. Not a lawyer, but my ex absolutely tanked his custody case in the most appalling way imaginable. To start, the child's mother had taken off with their son and refused to return him. This was in a state where that kind of stunt can get you stripped of even supervised visitation. Eventually, she sends the child back for visitation, and he shows up with visible injuries. He later tells his teacher, unprompted, that mom's boyfriend had hurt him. My ex's parents jumped in, hired an attorney, and they quickly got an ex parte order to keep the child with him. So far, so good. At the hearing, the court orders both parents to take drug tests before the next date. My ex had a history of drug use. Candy, let's call it. His attorney told him they could delay the hearing long enough for him to test clean. He shrugged it off and said not to worry. And then, he did candy. Failed the test. When the results came in, the child was with the mother for visitation, so she ran to court and got her own ex parte order. Meanwhile, my ex ghosted his attorney, didn't show up to court, didn't return calls. For months. Eventually, the attorney removed himself from the case entirely. What he never told anyone, especially not his parents, was that he didn't actually want full custody. He didn't want full-time responsibility. But instead of saying that out loud, he tanked his own case on purpose. Afterward, he claimed he failed the test because he worked construction and must have been exposed to something on the job. His parents may or may not have bought it. I didn't. I found all this out years later. We were together at the time. And he'd always said he lost custody because he couldn't afford a lawyer. When I learned the truth, I left immediately. It wasn't just that he didn't want to be a full-time parent. It was that he knew his child was being abused and he still chose the exit door. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dating someone with bad luck. I was dating a sociopath. Story 13. You absolutely could write a book. Hell, I'd buy the first copy, sign it myself, and hand it out at CLEs. Most disasters happen when I'm in trial or just briefly out of office 10 minutes of unsupervised client decision-making, and the case transforms into a slow-motion car crash. Most common screw-up? Lying about something small and easily disprovable. Nothing wrecks a case faster. Client on the stand. I picked my child up every single day from daycare. Reality. The daycare has a sign-out sheet. Grandma signed half of them. Case just took a nosedive. Also very popular. Changing their story mid-testimony. We prepped. I built strategy around what you told me. Suddenly, you've never filed a restraining order against your spouse? That's funny because the electronic public record begs to differ. Coming in hot at number 3, completely ignoring my advice. Me, don't touch the 150 in the joint account. Client, immediately touches the 150. Contempt, court orders sale of the marital home. Client, I'll just put a padlock on the house so no one can get in. Contempt. Part 2. Sequel no one asked for. But the grand finale? After 5 years of fighting, I got a client custody. Client goes to pick up the kids, brings a known violent felon, a loaded gun, and starts a brawl with the child's guardian. Emergency petition filed. Kids gone in less than a week. She turns to me in front of the judge and says, "This is your fault. You're a bad attorney." Judge laughs, says, "Counsel won this for you. You lost it." Granted my motion to withdraw right then and there. Story 14. My ex-wife, in a bid to cut costs, decided she didn't really need to prep with her lawyer before our custody hearing. No big deal, just the future of our kids, right? The hearing ended up being just the two attorneys and the judge. I wasn't in the room, but my lawyer gave me the play-by-play afterward. She laid out our case like a blueprint. The kids were thriving where they were same house, same schools, same friends. They had their own rooms. They were deep into their activities. And my parents lived nearby, always ready to help out. Stability, structure, support pretty hard to argue with. Then the judge turned to my ex's lawyer and asked a basic question. Where does she live? Dead air. Her lawyer had no idea. She knew my ex had moved, recently got tossed by the guy she cheated with, for cheating on him, but had no clue where she ended up. Not even a zip code. The judge actually shook his head, visibly done with the circus, and basically told them to just work out a plan he could rubber stamp. They defaulted to our proposal. I got primary custody. She got reasonable visitation, tailored to fit around the kids' schedules. We skipped the cookie cutter every other weekend thing because, the kids had lives. Lesson? You really need to keep your lawyer in the loop. Can't afford a meeting? Send an email, write on a napkin, something. My ex's entire strategy seemed to be, I'm their mother. That was it. That was her whole closing argument. Turns out, being a mom is important, but not knowing where you live kinda cancels it out. Story 15. My mom once had a front row seat to courtroom chaos, except this time, she was part of it. She was called as a witness in a criminal harassment case between two of our neighbors. From the start, it was clear the whole thing was a dumpster fire. The accused neighbor? Totally innocent. The so-called victims were the neighborhood instigators constantly picking fights, provoking him, then crying foul for attention and, allegedly, a shot at easy lawsuit money. Now, my mom being there had absolutely nothing to do with religion, but it just so happened the defendant was a secular Jew, same as my parents. Total coincidence. Well, that tiny, irrelevant detail made the two drama-loving neighbors very unhappy. In the middle of the proceedings, one of them suddenly shot to their feet and shouted some completely unhinged nonsense about how my mom was only there to help another Jew because Jews always cover for each other. Dead silence. Then the judge, who had clearly had enough of this circus, absolutely eviscerated the guy. We're talking a full verbal demolition. Called him out for bigotry, slammed the credibility of the whole case, and threw it out on the spot. Boom. Done. Case dismissed. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but I once sat on a jury and things went sideways before we even made it past day one of trial. It was a serious case. Trafficking, violence, and more candy than you'd find in a Halloween haul. Jury selection went smooth, and we were officially sworn in. During our lunch break, though, it got weird. Some random guy friend of the defendant just walks up to us outside the courthouse and starts ranting. Said the defendant was framed, told us to look up specific laws and statutes, basically trying to rewrite the trial before it started. We were stunned. I mean, this was textbook jury tampering. We all went straight to the bailiff to report it, fully expecting to get dismissed on the spot. The guy just sighed, like this wasn't even in his top 10 craziest courthouse moments, and told us to sit tight. When we got back, the courtroom had a whole different energy. Turns out, the case had suddenly settled. But the judge? Not having it, he tossed the settlement right out and lit into the defense, said he didn't appreciate having the court's time wasted by sideshow antics and stunt lawyering. So yeah, terrible friends, even worse legal strategy, and the defendant? Still serving time after pleading out not long after. Story 17. I'm a lawyer, and one day a woman walks into the office saying the bank's about to take her house. She's over 6 months behind on the mortgage. Panic in her voice, 4 small kids in tow. Now, where I practice, there's a process. If you're low income and can prove it, you fill out a few forms, and the court can waive both justice fees and the other side's attorney fees if you lose. It's a lifeline. She qualified, earned just above minimum wage, raising 4 kids alone. No husband, no support. The house? 2 bedrooms, crumbling walls, garbage stacked up, appliances dead, windows broken. It was barely livably a rough, sad place for children to grow up. But she wouldn't sign the poverty declaration. I'm not poor, she said, chin high. And even if I was, I've got pride. I'll raise the money. Wouldn't sign the papers giving us permission to represent her, either wanted a second opinion. Then she left. That was that. 3 or 4 months later, she showed up again, no appointment. Just walked in with a brown envelope full of cash. Enough to pay the fees. Problem was, the deadline had passed. The judge had already ruled. The house was gone. She stood there in the office, money in hand, thinking she'd made it just in time. And all I could think, wasp ride is a powerful thing, but it doesn't pay the court on time. Story 18. Not an attorney, but I was the one putting the cuffs on. So this woman I arrested for escape she'd cut off her GPS ankle monitor and bolted decides she wants a probable cause hearing. For context, that's a rare move in a case like this. Normally, it's either new public defenders testing the waters or something you see in more serious cases with complex charges. But for cutting and running from a GPS anklet? Not exactly the legal thriller of the year. And this wasn't a mystery case. We had the anklet. It had been recovered. We had logs, evidence, all of it. Slam dunk. Still, she insisted on the hearing. And more than that, she demanded to testify. Her public defender, pretty green at the time, tried to talk her down. Brought in another PD who had a history with her. She was, let's say, well acquainted with the court system. They both begged her not to do it. She wasn't having it. She wanted her moment. Right before the hearing, even the judge who's supposed to stay neutral took the unusual step of straight up warning her that testifying was a bad idea. She did it anyway. Takes the stand and spins this dramatic tale. Says her boyfriend kidnapped her, forced her to cut off the anklet, made her flee classic, not my fault energy. Except I get called up, pull out printed screenshots of her Facebook account, the boyfriend, and her daughter, all smiles hanging out together. Pictures posted during the time she claimed to be a terrified captive. Date stamped. Public. Undeniable. The judge didn't even flinch. Probable cause found. Case kicked to the grand jury. But I'll never forget the judge telling a defendant that this whole thing was a terrible idea, and then watching her crash and burn anyway. Sometimes they just can't help but light the match themselves. Story 19. I used to be a clerk at a law office, and one of our attorneys was handling a case that started off looking like a family drama and ended up veering straight into soap opera territory. The client was a man acting as trustee for his late mother's trust. According to him, his siblings were suing out of spite. He claimed they were furious there wasn't a pile of money left to split up, all because he'd used the trust to pay for their mom's end-of-life care. Expensive, yes, but necessary. At first glance, the charges on the bank statement seemed legit. Care services, pharmacies, grocery stores, even funeral costs. She'd been very ill. Everything added up until it didn't. One day, the attorney asked me to comb through a thick stack of printed bank statements to find a particular charge. No searchable PDF, just pages and pages of transactions. I was halfway through when something odd caught my eye. A recurring charge. Monthly. And not from any place that screamed medical care. I flagged it. Hey, I asked, did client's mom have a computer? The attorney shook his head. Nope. Elderly, legally blind, TV, and a landline were it. I slid the page over. What's Zoosk? He stared. Wait, isn't that a dating site? Yep. Turns out, our married client was using his blind mother's trust fund to pay for online dating. Naturally, that cracked the whole case wide open. Suddenly, every expense came under suspicion. Was that grocery store run for mom's bland soup? Or champagne and strawberries for his side piece? Was that department store charge for flannel nightgowns or satin and lace? By the time I left the firm, the case was unraveling fast. His siblings were on the warpath. His credibility was toast. And in a poetic twist of karma, his wife had filed for divorce. Story 20. Not a lawyer, but I worked closely with our company's legal team on a case that still lives rent-free in my head. One of our employees claimed he'd fallen off a ladder and messed up his back seriously. Thing is, he was working alone, against company policy, doing a task he wasn't authorized to touch. Still, we had to take the claim seriously. So we did the dance. Filed the paperwork, sent him to specialists, started light-duty accommodations. He got moved to the office, part-time hours, full-time pay, doing paperwork and ordering parts. Weeks passed, then months. He said he wasn't improving, said the office chairs were making his back worse, claimed he was being bullied, said he couldn't sleep, could barely use the bathroom, talked like this injury had shattered his whole life. Now, injuries like this can wreck your insurance premiums, tank your chances at major contracts. We had to handle it with gloves. Then, midsummer, I'm at a casual softball tournament with some buddies. Who do I see suiting up and stepping up to the plate? You guessed it, Mr. Life-altering back injury. He's not just playing. He's ripping balls, sprinting bases, sliding, diving like he's in the MLB playoffs. I took a few videos just in case my eyes were deceiving me. Spoiler, they weren't. I sent the footage straight to our legal team. They watched it, and the case shut down faster than a bar at last call. Look, even if he was in pain, You can't tell your doctor you need a special ergonomic chair just to stay upright and then be out there doing cartwheels in cleats. Story 21. Not a lawyer, but I got a front row seat to watch our nightmare neighbor take a noise complaint and nuke his entire life with it. He moved into our quiet, leafy suburb on an island near Montreal and immediately started acting like he was prepping for a Texas apocalypse. Giant front yard fence, oversized truck, yard full of loud, poorly trained dogs. Then came the crown jewel, a massive above-ground pool and a deck so tall it peered into 5 other yards like a lifeguard tower for bad decisions. We tried being neighborly. His girlfriend and daughter were polite, if distant. He shut every door, literally and figuratively. Next summer, he installs a sound system on his sky-high deck. Massive speakers, blasting music at top volume, even when no one was outside. My mom, who has serious sensory issues, couldn't even step into the garden without flinching. So she does the most polite thing imaginable. Asks him to please turn it down when they're not using it. He loses it, doubles down, installs a bigger sound system on his roof, and aims it directly at our house like it's a Cold War satellite dish. 12 hours a day, full blast. Even with windows shut, it was brutal. But my mom isn't the type to back down. She starts logging everything. Every hour, every song, every time she called the police. The cops would show up, check the front yard, see nothing, hear nothing, and leave. He got bolder. Until 2 of the kinder officers, both women, responded and actually came into our backyard. Heard it for themselves. Saw the log. They walk over to give him a warning. He opens the door and hurls sexist slurs at them. Then 6 his aggressive dogs on them. So now it's assault on a police officer. Then SPCA gets called. Turns out he's breeding dogs illegally, neglecting them, and keeping more than he's legally allowed. A neighbor admits he threatened them after they saw him beating one of the dogs. SPCA seizes the animals and adds animal cruelty to the list. Police follow up with other neighbors. Turns out he'd been dumping his pool water into someone else's yard and threatening her to stay quiet. Bylaw gets called. Turns out his massive deck and fortress fence are illegal. More fines. Forced takedown. Then police talk to the girlfriend and daughter. Domestic violence comes to light. They're connected with support services and eventually move out. Now he's in deep several courts, multiple charges. First lawyer tries delay tactics. Doesn't work. Witnesses, retired neighbors, my iron-willed mom, and a paralegal next door just keep showing up. He fires the lawyer, lies to the next. That implodes. So he goes full DIY and represents himself. It ends exactly how you'd imagine. Girlfriend ends up with the house. He loses a fortune. She eventually took him back, oddly enough. But now she seems to run the show. He's still weird, but quiet. No more music wars, no more chaos. Story 22. I'm no lawyer, but I once sued a company that installed my AC unit backwards. Yeah, backwards. It ended up wrecking part of my house. When I asked them to come check it out, they flat out refused. So I hired another company to fix their mess. Then I took them to small claims court. I showed up with receipts, photos, and every piece of proof I could gather. They showed up with a single text message from me saying, "It's fixed now." That message? Sent after I paid someone else to fix it. They tried to use that one line as proof everything was fine. The judge wasn't having either compared the date of my message to the invoice from the other company. Nice try. Then the guy pulls out the old, well, actually, my stepson did the work. As if that cleared him. The judge asked a few more questions and got him to admit his stepson was working for the company at the time. So, yeah, I won. Story 23. Not a lawyer, but I used to investigate road traffic accidents and similar claims. And let me tell you, the number of so-called passengers who couldn't remember a single thing about the crash they were allegedly in. Truly impressive, in the worst way. One case stands out. A car supposedly carrying 4 family members' 12 brothers, their sister, and their mother. The brothers, conveniently the driver and front seat passenger, had near-perfect recall of the event. Like a script, really. But the mother and sister? Absolutely useless for details. Couldn't remember where they sat in the car. Didn't know what time of day it was. No clue if it was sunny, raining, or snowing. Couldn't say where they were coming from or going to. Didn't know what hit them or from which direction. Couldn't describe the other car, no. The color, not the make, not even if it was a car or a truck. Couldn't recall if emergency services were involved. Nothing. Now, we always tried to account for how memory works under stress. People forget things, sure. But come one everything? Unrelated advice if you're going to fake an accident claim, maybe get everyone together first. Agree on the basics. At least pretend you were in the same car.